The morning sky was painted in shades of gray as Thomas Mercer stood before the small family cemetery, behind their old countryside home. A light mist hung in the air, clinging to his jacket and dampening his hair. He pulled his coat tighter around, himself more for comfort than warmth. The cold didn't bother him today, not on this day, the 10th anniversary of his sister's death. Thomas was 18 now, tall and lean with dark hair that fell across his forehead no matter how many times he pushed it back. His eyes, people often said, were just like Eliza's, deep blue with a hint of something curious, something searching. He remembered the day they told him she was gone. He'd been only 8 years old, building a fort from sofa cushions in the living room when his parents came in, their faces streaked with tears. His mother had pulled him close, her body shaking as she explained that Eliza, his 15-year-old sister and best friend in the whole world, had died from a rare illness that came on suddenly, too suddenly for goodbyes. For 10 years, he had carried that story in his heart. He'd grown up with the empty chair at the dinner table, the bedroom down the hall that nobody entered anymore, and the quiet way his parents changed the subject whenever Eliza's name was mentioned. Thomas knelt before her headstone, tracing the letters with his fingertips. "Eliza Ann Mercer," he whispered. "Beloved daughter and sister." The dates told their brief story, 15 short years. Below that, the words his parents had chosen, "Forever in our hearts, never from our thoughts." But something caught his eye that made him pause. Fresh flowers lay at the base of the headstone, not the ones he'd brought yesterday, but different ones. White lilies, Eliza's favorite. And next to them, partly hidden in the grass, was something that made his heart skip a beat. A small wooden bird, intricately carved. Thomas picked it up, turning it over in his palm. The details were perfect, each feather carefully etched, the eye a tiny bead of black. It was exactly like the ones Eliza used to make. She'd learned from old Mr. Patterson down the road, spending hours whittling away at blocks of wood until birds, squirrels, and tiny foxes emerged from her careful hands. Thomas still had the bear she'd made him for his 8th birthday just weeks before she died. But who would leave this here? His parents never carved, and they never brought lilies. His mother couldn't bear the smell of them anymore, said they reminded her too much of the funeral. The back door of the house creaked open, and Thomas quickly slipped the wooden bird into his pocket. "Tommy," his mother's voice carried across the yard. "Breakfast is ready, honey." He stood, brushing damp grass from his knees. "Coming, Mom." The kitchen was warm and bright, a stark contrast to the gloomy morning outside. His father sat at the table, newspaper spread before him, while his mother flipped pancakes at the stove. They looked so normal, so everyday. It was hard to connect them to the gnawing feeling in his stomach. "You were at her grave again," his father said. Not a question, but a statement. He didn't look up from his paper. "It's been 10 years today," Thomas replied, sliding into his seat. His mother placed a stack of pancakes in front of him, her hand lingering on his shoulder. "We know, sweetie. We've been thinking about it too." Thomas cut into his pancakes but didn't eat. Instead, he pulled the wooden bird from his pocket and placed it on the table. "I found this by her headstone, along with fresh lilies." The spatula, in his mother's hand, clattered to the floor. His father's newspaper lowered slowly, revealing eyes that had suddenly gone sharp and alert. "What's that?" his father asked, his voice too casual. "It's one of Eliza's birds, or at least it looks exactly like the ones she used to make." Thomas watched their faces carefully. Who would leave this at her grave? His mother bent to retrieve the spatula, taking longer than necessary. One of her old school friends, maybe. You know how many people loved her. After 10 years, and how would they know how to make these exactly like she did? His father folded the newspaper with precise movements. "Tommy, grief makes people do strange things. Someone probably bought it somewhere and thought it looked nice. But enough," his father said. The word firm, but not unkind. "Today is hard enough without creating mysteries where there aren't any. Eat your breakfast before it gets cold." Thomas ate mechanically, the food tasteless in his mouth. His parents moved around the kitchen with practiced ease, but he noticed the glances they exchanged when they thought he wasn't looking. Later that afternoon, when the house had settled into its weekend quiet, Thomas found himself drawn to the attic. He told himself he was looking for his old baseball cards, but his feet carried him to the corner where boxes of Eliza's things were stacked. His parents had packed away her life with careful efficiency in the weeks after her death, labeling each box in his mother's neat handwriting. Eliza, books. Eliza, school papers. Eliza, winter clothes. He pulled down the box labeled Eliza, keepsakes, and opened it gently. Inside were the treasures of his sister's short life. Her favorite stuffed rabbit with the missing ear, a collection of smooth stones from the river where they used to play, dried flowers pressed between the pages of an old dictionary, a stack of birthday cards but no wooden birds, not a single one, though she had made dozens of them. Thomas frowned, digging deeper. Where were her carvings? The tools Mr. Patterson had given her? The half-finished pieces she always kept in a small basket by her bed? A floorboard creaked behind him, and Thomas turned to find his father standing in the doorway. "Dad, where are all of Eliza's carvings? They're not in here." His father's expression was unreadable in the dim light of the attic. "We donated them, Tommy, to the children's hospital. She would have wanted other kids to enjoy them." "All of them? Even the special ones?" His father nodded, then gestured to the stairs. "Come on down now. Your mother doesn't like us going through these things. It upsets her." That night, Thomas couldn't sleep. The wooden bird sat on his nightstand, catching moonlight through the window. Something about his parents' reactions felt wrong. His mother's dropped spatula, his father's too casual questions. And why would they give away all of Eliza's carvings? They'd kept everything else. Around midnight, he heard his father's study door open and close, followed by the sound of his footsteps, heading downstairs. Curious, Thomas slipped out of bed and padded down the hallway. The study door stood slightly ajar, unusual since his father always locked it. Inside, the desk lamp cast a pool of golden light across the polished wood. Thomas hesitated for only a moment before stepping in. He'd never been in his father's study alone. It was off limits, a private space for work calls and important papers. The desk was meticulously organized, each item in its place. Thomas wasn't sure what he was looking for until he noticed the drawer that wasn't quite closed. Glancing over his shoulder, he eased it open. Inside was a folder labeled simply E.M., Eliza Mercer. His heart pounding, Thomas opened it to find medical documents, pages and pages of them. But as he scanned the dates, confusion washed over him. Some were from after Eliza's supposed death. A report dated just 3 years ago detailed patient progress and treatment responses, and every document bore the same letterhead: Blackwood Institute. Deeper in the drawer, he found bank statements showing regular payments to this Blackwood place. Large sums transferred on the first of every month for the past 10 years. The most recent was dated just 2 weeks ago. "What are you doing?" Thomas jerked upright. His father stood in the doorway, a glass of water in his hand and shock written across his face. "Dad," Thomas said, his voice shaking as he held up the folder. "What is this? Why are there medical reports about Eliza from after she died? What is Blackwood Institute, and why are you still paying them?" His father's face drained of color. For a long moment, the only sound was the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway. Then his father set down his water glass, straightened his shoulders, and closed the study door behind him. "You weren't supposed to find this," he said quietly. "Not yet. Maybe not ever." "Find what?" Thomas demanded, his voice rising. "Dad, what's going on? Is Eliza—" He couldn't finish the question, couldn't put words to the impossible thought forming in his mind. His father sank into the leather chair by the bookshelf, suddenly looking much older than his 52 years. "It's complicated, Tommy. What we did, what we told you, we thought it was for the best." "What did you do?" Thomas whispered, clutching the folder to his chest like a shield. His father looked up, his eyes red-rimmed and tired. "We protected you both the only way we knew how. But I see now that secrets like this, they find their way to the surface eventually." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows of the old house. And in that moment, standing in his father's study with evidence of a decade-long deception in his hands, Thomas knew that everything he believed about his sister's death had been a lie everyone had hidden from him for 10 long years. Thomas barely slept that night. His father's words echoed in his head as he tossed and turned. "We protected you both the only way we knew how." What did that mean? How could they have protected Eliza if she was dead? Unless... The thought was too enormous, too life-changing, to fully form in his mind. When morning came, the house was quiet. His parents' bedroom door remained closed, which was unusual for a Sunday. Normally, his mother would be downstairs making her special weekend waffles, the smell of coffee and maple syrup filling the house. Thomas showered and dressed quickly, then pulled out his laptop. His hands hovered over the keyboard for a moment. Before he typed, Blackwood Institute. The search results weren't what he expected. There was no official website, just a few brief mentions in news articles about medical research and psychiatric care. One article mentioned groundbreaking treatments for neurological anomalies, but gave no details. The address listed was for a location deep in the mountains about 3 hours' drive from their home. Thomas dug deeper, searching through forum posts and local news archives. He found mentions of security concerns, privacy lawsuits, and rumors about experimental treatments. Nothing concrete, but enough to send a chill down his spine. What kind of place was this? And what connection did it have to his sister? He was so absorbed in his research that he didn't hear his mother until she was right behind him. "Tommy, what are you doing?" Thomas slammed his laptop shut, his heart racing. "Just checking some stuff for school," he lied, turning to face her. His mother looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes. Her hair, usually neatly styled, was pulled back in a messy ponytail. "Your father told me about last night," she said, quietly. "About what you found. Are you going to tell me what's going on?" Thomas asked. She sat on the edge of his bed, smoothing the quilt with trembling hands. "Your father and I need to discuss some things first. It's complicated. That's what Dad said. But I'm not a kid anymore, Mom. I deserve to know the truth about my own sister." "You're right," she admitted, her voice breaking slightly. "You do deserve that. But please, give us a little time. There are things we need to prepare." As she left his room, Thomas knew he couldn't wait for whatever carefully constructed explanation his parents were putting together. He needed answers now, and if they wouldn't give them to him, he'd find them himself. He waited until his parents were both occupied, his father on a work call in his study, his mother in the garden, before heading up to the attic again. This time, he wasn't just looking casually. He had a purpose. The attic was hot and dusty in the midday sun. Thomas moved methodically through the boxes of Eliza's things, searching for anything that might give him clues. In a box labeled school papers, he found notebooks filled with her neat handwriting, art projects, and science reports. Nothing unusual until he reached the bottom of the box. There, hidden beneath a folder of old math tests, was a small leather-bound book with no markings on the cover. Thomas opened it, and his breath caught. It was Eliza's diary. He sat cross-legged on the attic floor, turning the pages carefully. The first entries were typical teenage stuff: complaints about homework, excitement about school dances, frustrations with parents who just don't understand. But about halfway through, the tone changed. It happened again today. One entry read, "In chemistry class, Mr. Donovan was explaining molecular structures, and suddenly I could see them. Not just the drawings on the board, but actually see the atoms moving and connecting. When I told Lily, she looked at me like I was crazy." "Maybe I am." Thomas frowned, turning the page. "Mom found me sleepwalking again last night. I don't remember getting out of bed, but she said I was in the hallway, saying things about patterns and connections that didn't make sense." She looked scared. "Dad wants to take me to another doctor." The entries grew more concerning as he read on. "The headaches are getting worse. They come with the visions now. Today I knew the phone was going to ring exactly 30 seconds before it did. I knew it would be Uncle David calling about his delayed flight. I don't know how I knew, I just did. When I told Mom, she started crying and left the room. I heard them talking late into the night. They think I don't know they've been calling specialists. The final entries were written in shaky handwriting. Some words pressed so hard into the paper that they left indentations on the next page. They're sending me away. I heard them talking. Someplace called Blackwood where people like me can get proper treatment. I don't know what that means, but I'm scared. They talk about me like I'm broken, like there's something wrong with my brain. Maybe there is, but what if there isn't? What if what's happening to me is something else entirely? I tried to tell Tommy about the things I can do, but Mom caught us and got so angry. She made me promise never to talk about it with him again. Said I'd scare him. But Tommy wouldn't be scared. He'd think it was cool. He always thinks I'm cool. The last entry was dated just 2 days before her supposed death. I'm writing this under my covers with a flashlight. They're taking me tomorrow. I heard Dad saying they'll tell everyone I'm going to a special medical facility for my condition. But I also heard him talking about what to tell Tommy. Something about it being kinder if he thought I was gone forever, rather than sick in the head. They're going to tell him I died. How is that kinder? I don't want to leave him. I don't want him to think I'm dead. I'm going to try to talk to them one more time in the morning. Make them understand I'm not crazy, I'm just different. That was the last entry. Thomas stared at the empty pages that followed, his hands shaking. They had lied to him. Eliza hadn't died. They had sent her away and told him she was dead. For 10 years he'd mourned a sister who was still alive. The shock gave way to anger, then determination. He tucked the diary into his backpack and climbed down from the attic, his mind racing. He needed more information about this Blackwood place. And he knew who might have it. Uncle David had always been close to Eliza. He was his mother's younger brother, the fun uncle who showed up with inappropriate gifts and took them on adventures their parents wouldn't approve of. The wooden bird at Eliza's grave, it had to be from him. He was the only other person who knew about her carvings. Thomas pulled out his phone and texted, "Need to talk, important about Eliza." The response came almost immediately. "Not on the phone. Meet me at Parker's Diner, 3 p.m. Parker's Diner was a small roadside place about 20 minutes from their house. Thomas told his parents he was meeting friends and rode his bike there, arriving just as the afternoon rush was ending. Uncle David was already in a booth at the back, nursing a cup of coffee. He looked nervous, his usual easygoing demeanor replaced with something tense and watchful. "I wasn't sure you'd come," Thomas said, sliding into the seat across from him. Uncle David ran a hand through his graying hair. "Your text wasn't exactly subtle, kid. 10 years of silence about her, and suddenly you're reaching out. Something's up." "I found her diary," Thomas said, keeping his voice low, "and medical papers in Dad's study, about Blackwood Institute." He watched his uncle's face carefully. "She's not dead, is she?" The older man's shoulders slumped, as if a weight he'd been carrying for years had suddenly become too heavy. "I told them this would happen eventually. Secrets this big, they have a way of surfacing. So it's true, she's alive?" Uncle David glanced around the diner before leaning forward. "Yes. She's alive, Tommy." Those 3 words hit Thomas like a physical blow. Even though he'd suspected it since finding the diary, hearing it confirmed made his head swim. "Where is she? Why did they lie to me?" "It's complicated. Stop saying that," Thomas hissed, slamming his palm on the table. A few diners looked their way and he forced himself to lower his voice. "Everyone keeps saying it's complicated, but it's not. They told me my sister was dead. They made me mourn her for 10 years. What possible reason could justify that?" Uncle David sighed deeply. "Your sister started experiencing things when she was 15. Things that scared your parents. Visions, premonitions, abilities they couldn't explain. The doctors they took. Herta threw around terms like temporal lobe epilepsy, schizophrenia, psychosis. But none of the medications helped. In fact, they made things worse. The diary mentioned visions, Thomas said. She could see things before they happened. His uncle nodded. Among other things, your father started researching specialized facilities. That's when he found Blackwood. They specialize in what they call neurological anomalies, brain patterns that don't fit known conditions. They promise treatments, maybe even a cure. But why tell everyone she died? Why tell me she died? Uncle David's eyes grew sad. That was your father's decision. The stigma around mental illness was something he couldn't bear, not for his perfect daughter, not for the family name. And he genuinely thought it would be easier for you to believe she had died than to know your sister was institutionalized indefinitely with no guarantee of recovery. That's insane, Thomas whispered. Yes, it was, his uncle agreed. I fought him on it. We didn't speak for almost 2 years afterward. But by then the story was established, the funeral had happened, and you seemed to be coping. Reopening that wound seemed cruel. So you've known all this time? Have you seen her? Uncle David nodded slowly. I've been visiting her since I reconciled with your parents, about once a month. I bring her books, news from home. I taught her to carve wood. It helps with her focus. That bird you found was one of hers. She made it for you. Thomas felt tears burning behind his eyes. I need to see her. I need to go to Blackwood. It's not that simple, Tommy. Blackwood isn't a regular hospital. It's secure, isolated. They don't just let people walk in. Then help me, Thomas pleaded. You've been going there for years. You must know how to get in. Please, Uncle David. She's my sister. His uncle looked at him for a long moment, then pulled out a napkin and wrote something down. This is my login. For their visitor system, they have your records as a deceased immediate family member, so that won't work. But mine might get you in the door. He pushed the napkin across the table. But, Tommy, be careful. There's more going on at Blackwood than just treatment. The things your sister can do, they interest certain people. Powerful people. Thomas tucked the napkin into his pocket, his mind already forming a plan. One more thing, he asked. Is she getting better? Their treatment, is it helping her? A shadow crossed his uncle's face. No, he said softly. I don't think it is. And lately, I'm not sure that's even their goal anymore. Thomas walked into his house just before dinner, his mind spinning with everything Uncle David had told him. The familiar smell of his mother's cooking filled the air, pot roast, potatoes, the same Sunday dinner they'd had for years. It felt strange that such normal things continued while his entire world was being turned upside down. His parents were in the kitchen, his mother stirring gravy on the stove while his father set the table. They looked up when he entered, their expressions a mixture of guilt and concern. We need to talk, Thomas said, his voice steadier than he expected. He pulled Eliza's diary from his backpack and placed it on the kitchen counter. I know everything. His mother's hand flew to her mouth and his father's face turned ashen. The wooden spoon his mother had been holding clattered into the pot. Where did you find that? His father asked quietly. In the attic, hidden under her school papers. Thomas crossed his arms. I also talked to Uncle David. He confirmed what I already figured out. Eliza isn't dead. She's at Blackwood Institute. You've been lying to me for 10 years. His mother sank into a kitchen chair, tears already streaming down her face. His father switched off the stove and stood very still, as if gathering strength. Tommy, sit down, his father said, please. Thomas remained standing. I don't want more lies. No more lies, his father promised. Just the full story now. You deserve that. Reluctantly, Thomas sat at the table. His father joined them, reaching for his wife's hand across the polished wood. Your sister began experiencing episodes. When she was 15, his father began. At first, we thought it was typical teenage mood swings. But it got worse. She'd have these moments where she'd seem to disconnect from reality. She'd make wild claims about being able to see things before they happened. about feeling other people's emotions, about moving objects with her mind. She wasn't making claims, Thomas said. According to her diary, those things were actually happening to her. His mother wiped her tears with a napkin. That's what she believed, yes. But Tommy, you have to understand. We took her to every specialist we could find. They all said the same thing. Early onset schizophrenia, possibly, complicated by temporal lobe epilepsy. We tried medications, therapy, even alternative treatments. Nothing worked. She was getting worse. That's when we found Blackwood, his father continued. They specialize in cases like Eliza's. Young people with severe psychiatric conditions that don't respond to conventional treatment. They offered hope when no one else did. But why tell me she died? Thomas demanded. Why make up that whole story about an illness? His parents exchanged a look, loaded with years of shared guilt. It was my decision, his father admitted. I convinced myself it would be easier for you. You were only 8. How could we explain that your beloved sister was in a psychiatric facility with no clear timeline for coming home? That she might never fully recover? I thought a clean break would be kinder. Let you grieve once intensely rather than hope endlessly for a recovery that might never come. His mother reached across the table, trying to take Thomas's hand, but he pulled away. We also wanted to protect Eliza, she said softly. There's such a stigma around mental illness. If everyone knew she was institutionalized, they would always see her as that poor crazy girl. If they thought she died from a physical illness, her memory would be untainted. So you erased her, Thomas said, his voice cracking. You wiped away who she really was and replaced her with some sanitized memory of a dead girl. Did you ever think about what that did to her? Knowing her entire family was pretending she didn't exist anymore? We visited her, his father said defensively. Every month for the first few years. But the doctors said our visits were triggering episodes. They recommended we step back, let the treatments work without emotional interference. And you just agreed? You abandoned her? Thomas couldn't keep the disgust from his voice. We thought we were doing what was best for her. His mother cried. Every decision we made, no matter how wrong it looks now, we made because we thought it would help her get better. Thomas stood up, unable to contain his anger. You held a funeral. You put an empty coffin in the ground and let everyone, including me, believe she was dead. How could that possibly help her? We never thought it would go on this long, his father said, his voice heavy with regret. The doctors initially told us 6 months, maybe a year of intensive treatment. Then she'd be well enough to come home and I don't know. We hadn't figured out how to explain her return. We just wanted her to get better first. He ran a hand over his face. But she didn't get better. Every time we thought there was progress, she'd have another episode, more severe than before. Uncle David still visits her, Thomas said. It wasn't a question. His mother nodded. David never agreed with our decision. He fought us on it from the beginning. When he threatened to tell you the truth 3 years ago, we finally allowed him to visit her. It was either that or risk him blowing up everything we'd tried to protect. Protect, Thomas repeated, almost spitting the word. You keep using that word. But all you've done is hide. From the truth, from your daughter, from me. His father stood up suddenly. You don't understand what it was like, watching your child deteriorate, hearing her talk about voices and visions, seeing the fear in her eyes. Do you know what it's like to have doctors tell you your daughter might be a danger? To herself, to others, even to her little brother. We did the best we could with an impossible situation. The silence that followed was thick with 10 years of buried pain. Thomas looked at his parents, really looked at them, and saw not the monsters his anger had painted them as, but 2 broken people who had made terrible choices out of fear and desperation. I want to see her, Thomas said finally. I need to see her with my own eyes. His parents exchanged another look. The facility has strict visitor protocols, his mother said. Family only and only with advance approval. And they think you're, well, dead. Uncle David gave me his login information. I can go as his guest. Thomas watched his father's expression harden at the mention of Uncle David. I'm going, with or without your blessing, but it would be easier with your help. His father seemed to age years in moments, the weight of a decade-long deception finally settling fully on his shoulders. If you're determined to do this, there's something you should know first. He went to his study and returned with a thick folder, which he placed on the table. These are all of Eliza's medical records from Blackwood. The most recent tests, brain scans, treatment plans. Thomas flipped through the pages, struggling to understand the medical terminology. What am I looking for? The latest diagnosis, his father said quietly. 3 years ago, they changed their approach. They stopped treating her condition as psychiatric and began classifying it as something else. Thomas found the page his father was referring to. The heading read, Neurological Anomaly, Type 4, Enhanced Perception with Telekinetic Manifestations. What does this mean? Thomas asked, looking up. It means, his mother said carefully, that after years of treatment, the doctors at Blackwood don't think Eliza is mentally ill anymore. They think she's different. Special, even. Different how? His father took a deep breath. They believe the things Eliza claimed she could do, seeing future events, sensing emotions, affecting electrical fields are real abilities. Not hallucinations or delusions, but actual measurable phenomena. Thomas felt a chill run through him. Are you saying she has powers? Like in the movies? Not like in the movies, his father said quickly. More subtle, less controllable, but yes, essentially. At least that's what they believe now. And what do you believe? Thomas asked. His parents were silent for a long moment. We don't know what to believe anymore, his mother finally answered. We just want her to be well, to be happy. Thomas closed the folder. I need to see her. Tomorrow. His father nodded slowly. I'll call in sick to work. We'll go together. When Thomas started to protest, he held up a hand. I know you have Uncle David's login, but trust me, you'll need more than that to get into Blackwood. They have security protocols, checkpoints, and... He hesitated. There are things about the facility, about what they do there that you need to be prepared for. What kinds of things? Thomas asked. His father's expression was grim. Blackwood isn't just a treatment center anymore. Even though you pretended it was you who was afraid, you'd bring your flashlight and we'd make shadow animals on the wall until I fell asleep. Eliza's eyes widened. The lights in the room flickered briefly, and a small gasp escaped her lips. Tommy? She breathed, reaching out again. This time her fingers made contact with his cheek, warm and real. You're alive. You're really here. I'm alive, he confirmed. And I just found out you are, too. She launched herself forward, wrapping her arms around him in a fierce hug. Thomas held her tightly, feeling how thin she had become, how fragile she seemed despite the strength of her embrace. Over her shoulder, he saw Dr. Winters watching them intently, making notes on a tablet. When Eliza finally pulled back, her eyes were wet with tears. They told me you were dead, she repeated. They said there was no point in me asking about you anymore. I'm sorry, Thomas said. I didn't know. All this time, I thought you were gone. I visited your grave. I mourned you. My grave? Eliza looked confused, then bitter understanding crossed her face. Of course, they needed somewhere for people to visit, didn't they? Can't have people asking questions. Thomas nodded. There's an empty coffin in the cemetery behind our house with your name on it. Eliza laughed, a strange sound with no humor in it. The lights flickered again. All this time we've both been mourning each other while I've been locked up in here. What have they been doing to you here? Thomas asked, keeping his voice low. Eliza glanced at Dr. Winters, who was still watching them. They call it treatment, but it's mostly tests, brain scans, blood work, stimulation exercises. She leaned closer. They're studying me, Tommy. All of us here. We're not patients, we're lab rats. Thomas felt a chill run down his spine. Can you really do the things they say? See the future, feel emotions, affect electronics? And more, Eliza whispered. I've gotten better at controlling it. Had to survive this place. She nodded toward the lights. That was me just now. When I get emotional, it's harder to contain. Before Thomas could respond, Dr. Winters approached them. I see the reunion is going well, she said, her clinical smile firmly in place. However, I need to inform you that we have a situation developing. Eliza is scheduled for a procedure this afternoon and will need to cut this visit short. A procedure? Thomas asked. What kind of procedure? Nothing to concern yourself with, Dr. Winters replied smoothly. Routine brain mapping. We do it, monthly. Eliza's hand gripped Thomas's arm, her nails digging in slightly. Her eyes held a warning he couldn't misinterpret. When can we visit again? Thomas's father asked, coming to stand beside them. Let's see how Eliza responds to today's procedure, Dr. Winters said. We can discuss future visits next week. Now, if you'll excuse us. She gestured for Eliza to stand. Eliza rose slowly, her eyes never leaving Thomas's face. It was good to see my family again, she said, her voice taking on a flat quality it hadn't had when she was speaking just to Thomas. Thank you for visiting. As Dr. Winters led Eliza toward a side door, she looked back over her shoulder at Thomas. Her lips moved, forming words with no sound. Help me. They're moving me tomorrow. Then she was gone, and Thomas was left standing with his parents in the suddenly quiet recreation room. The other patients had stopped their activities and were watching them curiously. We need to leave, his father said quietly, placing a hand on Thomas's shoulder. Now. As they walked back to the car, Thomas knew one thing with absolute certainty. He wasn't going to lose his sister again. Not after finding her, not after seeing the fear in her eyes. I need to make a phone call, he said as they reached the parking lot. I need to talk to Uncle David. Uncle David arrived at the motel just after midnight. Thomas had convinced his parents to stay overnight in the small town nearest to Blackwood instead of driving back home. They'd taken rooms at a roadside motel, plain and dated but clean. His parents were asleep in the room next door when the soft knock came at Thomas's door. You shouldn't have called me, Uncle David said as he entered, glancing nervously down the empty walkway before closing the door. Your father will be furious. I don't care, Thomas replied. They're moving Eliza tomorrow. We need to get her out tonight. Uncle David ran a hand through his hair, which was standing up in odd places as if he'd been repeatedly doing just that during his drive here. This is crazy, Tommy. Blackwood isn't some summer camp you can just check her out of. It's a secure facility with guards, cameras, locked doors, which is why I need your help. Thomas spread out a rough map he'd drawn from memory of the facility. You've been visiting for years. You must know the layout, the security patterns. Uncle David stared at the map, then at Thomas's determined face. Even if we could get in, and that's a massive if, where would we take her? Your parents' house, my apartment? The authorities would find her in hours. I've been thinking about that, Thomas said. We don't need to hide her forever, just long enough to get proof of what's happening at Blackwood. Eliza said they're not treating patients there, they're studying them like lab rats. If we can prove that, expose them, you're talking about taking on a powerful research institution with deep pockets and high-level connections, Uncle David interrupted. This isn't a movie, Tommy. The good guys don't always win just because they're right. So we do nothing? Thomas demanded. Leave her there. You saw her face when she realized I was alive. They've been lying to her for years, experimenting on her. And now they're shipping her off to who knows where. I can't abandon her again. Uncle David sighed deeply, the weight of the decision visible in the slump of his shoulders. I've been visiting Eliza every month for 6 years, he said quietly. Watching them drain the life from her bit by bit. Each time I go, there's less of the girl I knew and more of whatever they're turning her into. He looked up, resolve hardening in his eyes. You're right. We can't leave her there. Relief flooded through Thomas. So you'll help? God help me, yes. Uncle David pulled a chair up to the small table and studied Thomas's map. But we need to be smart about this. Security is tightest at the main entrance and around the perimeter fence. But there's a service road that leads to the back of the facility for deliveries. Fewer cameras, fewer guards. Thomas nodded eagerly. How do we get in? I have an access card that gets me into the visitor areas. It won't get us into the residential wings, but... He hesitated. There's a maintenance worker, Frank. His daughter was at Blackwood years ago. She died during an experimental treatment. He stays because he's gathering evidence, trying to build a case against them. He might help us. Can you contact him? Uncle David checked his watch. He'll be on shift now. I have his number. He pulled out his phone, stepping into the bathroom for privacy while he made the call. When he returned a few minutes later, his expression was grim but determined. Frank will help. He can get us in through the service entrance and disable the cameras in the East Wing for exactly 10 minutes at 2 a.m. That's where Eliza is, but after that we're on our own. Thomas felt a mix of fear and exhilaration. That's all we need. Get in, get Eliza, get out. There's more, Uncle David said. Frank says Eliza isn't the only patient being moved tomorrow. There are 3 others with similar abilities. They're all being transferred to a new facility, more secure than Blackwood. If we're going to do this, we should try to help them all. Thomas hesitated. Rescuing Eliza was one thing, but 3 additional people complicated everything. Do we have anywhere to take 4 people? I have a cabin, Uncle David said. Deep in the woods off the grid, no one knows about it except me. We can hide them there while we figure out next steps. Thomas nodded slowly. Okay, let's do this. The next hour was a blur of preparation, changing into dark clothes, gathering supplies, going over the plan again and again. At 1:30 a.m. they slipped out of the motel, leaving a note for Thomas's parents that explained just enough without giving away their destination. The night was moonless and cold as they drove Uncle David's truck along the back roads toward Blackwood. They parked half a mile from the service entrance, hidden among the trees, and continued on foot. Thomas's heart pounded so hard he was sure it must be audible in the quiet forest. The service entrance was a simple gate in the fence with a small security booth. As Uncle David had predicted, only one guard was on duty, and he was focused on his phone, barely glancing up as they approached. Uncle David waved his access card casually. Late-night visit for the Richardson girl, he said, mentioning the name of another patient he sometimes visited. Got approved this afternoon. The guard frowned. I didn't get any notification. Call Dr. Winters if you want, Uncle David said confidently. But she won't appreciate being woken up to confirm something she already signed off on. The guard hesitated, then waved them through with a shrug. Your funeral if you're lying. Once past the gate, they hurried along the service road toward the main complex. Frank was waiting by a side door, his face tense beneath his maintenance cap. You're late, he whispered. We have exactly 8 minutes before the cameras come back on. Follow me and stay quiet. They followed him through dim service corridors, past storage rooms and laundry facilities. The only sounds were their muffled footsteps and the distant hum of machinery. Finally, Frank stopped at a plain door and swiped his access card. East Wing. Room 312 is the girl you're looking for. The others are in 310, 315, and 318. I've unlocked all their doors. He handed Uncle David a key card. This will get you out the same way we came in. Once you have them, you have exactly 4 minutes to get back here before the night patrol comes through. Thank you, Uncle David said, gripping the man's hand. We won't forget this. Frank's expression was solemn. Just make sure whatever proof you find gets to the right people. I've been waiting years for someone to bring this place down. Thomas and Uncle David moved quickly down the residential hallway. The doors all looked the same, plain white with small windows and digital locks showing green now instead of red. They reached room 312 and pushed it open. Eliza was sitting on her bed, fully dressed as if she'd been expecting them. Her face lit up when she saw Thomas, but she put a finger to her lips, warning them to be quiet. I knew you'd come, she whispered. I saw it this morning. You and Uncle David. This exact moment. We need to hurry, Thomas whispered back. We're getting you out of here, but there are others. I know, she said. I've already told them to be ready. She tapped her temple. We can communicate sometimes. When we're close enough. Thomas stared at her in wonder. You can read minds? A small smile. Not exactly, but strong thoughts, emotions, those we can share. She stood, swaying slightly. They gave me something earlier, to sedate me for transport. I'm a little dizzy. Uncle David moved to support her. Can you walk? She nodded. I'll manage. The others might be worse, though. They got higher doses. They moved into the hallway, where 3 more people were already emerging from their rooms. 2 women and a young man, all looking disoriented but determined. One of the women, older than the rest with streaks of gray in her dark hair, seemed to be the leader. Rita, she introduced herself briefly. That's Lily and Ben. Eliza says we can trust you. We need to move fast, Uncle David said. Follow us and stay quiet. The small group made their way back through the service corridors. Thomas supported Eliza, who leaned against him heavily, her steps becoming more unsteady as the minutes passed. They were halfway to the exit when an alarm suddenly blared through the building. Someone triggered a security alert, Uncle David said, his voice tight with tension. Run! They broke into a sprint, half carrying the sedated patients between them. Behind them, shouts and footsteps echoed through the corridors. They burst through the service door into the cold night air just as flashlight beams began sweeping the area. The fence, Uncle David gasped, pointing toward the service gate where they'd entered. If we can get past it, we won't make it, Rita said, her eyes focused on the approaching security team. Not all of us. She turned to Eliza. Together? Eliza nodded, and the 4 patients formed a circle, holding hands. Thomas watched in astonishment as they closed their eyes in unison, their faces tight with concentration. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, with a sound like electrical circuits overloading, every light in the facility went out simultaneously. The security systems, the alarms, even the flashlights carried by the guards. All dead. Now. Eliza gasped, her voice strained. We can't hold it for long. In the sudden darkness, they stumbled toward the fence. Guards shouted in confusion, behind them, unable to see in the pitch black. They reached the gate, Uncle David fumbling with the key card Frank had given him. With a click, it swung open, and they rushed through into the forest beyond. They were halfway to the truck when the lights at Blackwood flickered back on. Eliza collapsed against Thomas, completely drained. That was amazing, Thomas whispered as he helped her into the truck. How did you do that? Together we're stronger, she said weakly. Blackwood figured that out. It's why they're moving us. They found others like us. They're building a collection. Once they were all safely in the truck, Uncle David sped away from Blackwood, taking back roads and forest tracks to avoid any pursuers. By dawn, they reached the cabin, a small, sturdy structure deep in the mountains, miles from the nearest town. As they helped the exhausted patients inside, Thomas realized this was only the beginning. Blackwood wouldn't let them go easily. They would search, and eventually they would find them. They needed a plan, evidence, protection. What now? He asked Uncle David as they watched the sun rise through the trees. Now we unlock the truth, his uncle replied. Not just for Eliza, but for all of them. We find out what Blackwood has been doing all these years, and we make sure everyone knows about it. Thomas looked at his sister, who had fallen asleep on the cabin's small couch. After 10 years of believing she was dead, he had found her alive. Changed, damaged, but still Eliza. He thought of the empty coffin in the family cemetery, the lie that had shaped his entire adolescence. I need to go back home first, he said quietly. There's something I need to do. 3 days later, Thomas stood in the family cemetery, Uncle David and Eliza beside him. His parents were there too, still shocked by the sudden return of their daughter, still processing the consequences of their decade-long deception. Together they opened Eliza's coffin, the empty box that had symbolized so much loss and so many lies. Inside, Thomas placed the wooden bird he had found at her grave, along with the diary that had led him to the truth. Then he took his sister's hand, feeling her warm and alive beside him. "No more lies," he said firmly, looking directly at his parents. "No more hiding. Whatever happens next, we face it together." Eliza squeezed his hand, and somewhere in the distance, a light bulb flickered.